He hadn't eaten all day, but one look at that starving dog and he didn't even think twice. What he didn't know was that someone was watching, and that dog wasn't just any stray. For 3 years she had been searching for one person, someone the world had overlooked, and she just found him, feeding her dead son's dog. She wasn't looking for the richest man in the city. She was looking for the kindest one, and she just found him. "My name is Katherine Vance," she said, "and I think you're exactly the man I've spent 3 years looking for. Stay until the end, because what happens next will change his daughter's life forever." He gave away the only food he had left that day to a starving stray dog in the park, never once imagining that dog belonged to a billionaire who had been searching 3 long years for a man exactly like him. By the end of this story, that same tired, broke, single father would be sitting behind a desk on the 40th floor of the tallest building downtown, and his 6-year-old daughter would never have to go to bed hungry again. If you want to know how one torn sandwich changed everything, stay with me until the very end, because the answer to how this happened will surprise you. And if stories about ordinary people getting the second chance they deserve mean something to you, do me a favor right now, hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell one of these true-to-life stories every single week, and you will not want to miss what's coming. Jack Turner had not always been broke. 6 years ago, he had a steady job at a mid-sized construction firm, a small rented house with a yard, and a wife named Claire who used to leave notes in his lunchbox. Then the company downsized. Claire could not handle the stress of the months that followed, and one morning Jack woke up to find her side of the bed empty and a note on the kitchen counter instead of in his lunchbox, explaining that she needed a different life than the one he could give her. She left behind a toddler, a stack of unpaid bills, and a silence in the house that never quite went away. Jack never told Emma the whole truth. He simply told her that sometimes grown-ups get lost trying to find themselves, and that some daddies stay no matter what, and he had meant every word of it. For the past 2 years, Jack had worked the day shift loading trucks at a regional distribution warehouse, supplementing his hourly wage with weekend construction jobs whenever a foreman would take him. It was enough, most months, to keep the lights on in the small one-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on Route 9, but only just. Emma slept on a fold-out mattress in the corner of the living room because Jack had given her the only real bedroom the apartment had. He told her it was because she was a princess, and princesses needed their own tower. She believed him completely, the way 6-year-olds believe the things that make the world feel safe. The day everything changed started like any other. Jack picked Emma up from school, walked her the 6 blocks to the small city park near their apartment because she loved the swings, and settled onto their usual bench while she played. He had one sandwich in his backpack, made that morning from the last 2 slices of bread and a thin scrape of peanut butter, meant to be his lunch, except the warehouse shift had run through without a break, and he had not eaten it yet. He was saving it, quietly, for dinner, because there was almost nothing left in the refrigerator at home, and payday was still 4 days away. He had already decided Emma would eat first tonight, as she always did, and he would tell her he had already eaten at work, as he always did. That was when the dog appeared. It came limping out from behind a hedge near the park's edge, ribs visible beneath a matted golden-brown coat, one back paw held slightly off the ground, a torn red collar hanging loosely around its neck with no tag attached. It did not approach Emma at the swings, sensing perhaps that children moved too fast and unpredictably. Instead, it circled wide and came to a stop several feet from Jack's bench, sitting down heavily, watching him with dark, exhausted eyes the way only a truly hungry animal watches a person holding food. Jack looked at the dog for a long moment. He looked down at the sandwich in his hands, the one meal standing between him and an empty stomach until tomorrow's shift. And then, without any real deliberation at all, because deliberation was a luxury Jack Turner had never been able to afford when it came to suffering right in front of him, he tore the sandwich in half and set one half down on the pavement a few feet away. The dog did not rush the food the way Jack expected. It approached slowly, almost cautiously, as though it had learned the hard way that kindness could not always be trusted, and only when Jack backed away and sat back down on the bench did it finally eat, quickly and desperately, in the way of an animal that has gone far too long between meals. Jack watched it eat with something aching in his own chest, a recognition he did not entirely want to examine too closely. He knew what it felt like to eat like that. He had eaten like that more than once in the last 2 years, when he lied to Emma about already having dinner at work. Emma, still swinging nearby, called out for her father to push her higher, and Jack rose from the bench to oblige her, glancing back once at the dog, which had finished the sandwich and settled itself a few feet away, watching him with an expression that seemed absurdly, almost grateful. He pushed his daughter on the swing for another 20 minutes, listening to her chatter about a spelling test and a classmate's birthday party she had not been invited to. And by the time they packed up to walk home, the dog had trailed a short, careful distance behind them the entire way to the edge of the park, stopping only when they reached the sidewalk, sitting down on the curb and watching them go with the same patient, unreadable eyes. Jack felt an odd tug of guilt leaving it there. The same guilt he felt most nights tucking Emma into bed on a fold-out mattress he wished he could replace with something better. But he told himself, as he told himself most nights, that he had already given what he had to give, and that would simply have to be enough. What Jack did not know and could not have known was that a black sedan had been parked at the curb beyond the tree line for the past 11 minutes, and that the woman inside it, seated in the back with the rear window lowered just enough to see, had not taken her eyes off him since the moment the dog first appeared. Katherine Vance had spent 3 years and an amount of money she genuinely could not calculate looking for that dog, not because it was valuable in any ordinary sense, but because it had belonged to her son Michael, before the car accident that took him from her 8 years ago, and when the groundskeeper at her estate had accidentally let it slip its leash 7 months prior. Katherine had hired private investigators, posted rewards, driven the surrounding counties herself more nights than her staff would ever know, refusing to let go of the last living thing that had loved her son the way she had. But Katherine Vance was not simply watching for the dog that afternoon. She had been watching people for 3 years, in a much broader and stranger sense than her staff understood, because losing Michael had also cost her the only heir she trusted to inherit Vance Global Enterprises, the company she had built from a single real estate office into a multinational conglomerate worth more money than most people could picture. She had no other children. Her extended family, when she was honest with herself, had circled her like vultures since the funeral, more interested in the estate than in her, and every distant nephew and corporate hopeful who had ever sat across from her in a boardroom had eventually shown her, in some small unguarded moment, exactly why she could never hand them the future she had spent her life building. She had begun quietly and without telling a soul, including her own board of directors, to look for something else entirely. Not credentials, not connections. She was looking for character, the kind you cannot fake in an interview, the kind that only shows itself when a person believes absolutely no one of consequence is watching. She had watched dozens of people that year in dozens of unscripted moments, dropped wallets left unreturned, tips withheld from struggling waitresses, 100 small failures of decency that told her everything she needed to know about the person's true character. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a public park with peeling paint on the benches, she watched a thin, tired man in a worn gray hoodie give away literally half of the only food he had to an animal that could offer him nothing whatsoever in return, without a single second of visible hesitation. Katherine Vance sat in the back of her sedan and felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt certain. She stepped out of the car slowly, leaning on her cane more than she strictly needed to, using the extra seconds to compose herself, because her hands, she noticed distantly, were shaking. She walked toward the bench as Biscuit, who she now recognized with a jolt of pure disbelief despite the matted fur and the missing collar tag, rose from where he sat beside Jack's feet and trotted straight toward her, tail wagging for the first time in 7 months. Jack watched, utterly bewildered, as the stray dog he had just fed abandoned him without hesitation to greet an elegant, silver-haired stranger who was now kneeling on the pavement in a camel-wool coat, arms wrapped around the animal's neck, tears running freely down her face in a way that seemed to genuinely startle her own composure. "I'm so sorry," Jack said, standing up quickly, unsure what he had stumbled into. Is he yours? I didn't know, he looked hungry. I didn't mean any harm by feeding him." Katherine looked up at him from where she knelt, her hazel eyes still wet, and for a long moment she simply studied his face the way a person studies something they have been searching for without knowing its shape. "No," she finally said, rising with the help of her cane, brushing off her coat. "You did nothing wrong at all. You did the only right thing there was to do." She held out a gloved hand. "My name is Katherine Vance, and I believe you may be exactly the man I have spent 3 years looking for." Jack had no idea who Katherine Vance was, which, though he would not learn this until much later, was itself one of the qualities that convinced her he was the right man, because it meant nothing about his kindness toward the dog had been performed for an audience he recognized as powerful. She explained only a little that afternoon, mindful of Emma playing nearby. mindful of not overwhelming a stranger in a public park with the full weight of what she was actually proposing. She told him her name, that the dog had belonged to her late son, and that she would like, if he was willing, to buy him and his daughter dinner that week to properly thank him. Jack, embarrassed and still deeply confused, tried to refuse twice before Emma, who had wandered over holding a fistful of dandelions, looked up at the elegant stranger and asked with total 6-year-old bluntness whether she could keep the doggy. And Katherine laughed, a real laugh, for what her driver would later say was the first time in over a year. The dinner happened 4 days later. In a modest family restaurant Katherine chose deliberately over anywhere fancier, because she wanted to watch how Jack treated the waitress, how he cut Emma's chicken into small pieces without being asked, how he quietly slipped his own dessert onto his daughter's plate when he thought no one was looking. Over that dinner, Katherine told him, carefully and without exaggeration, who she really was. She watched his face go pale, watched him set down his fork, watched him ask, in a voice barely above a whisper, whether this was some kind of joke, because things like this simply did not happen to men like him. She assured him it was not a joke. She explained that Vance Global Enterprises needed new leadership she could trust completely, that her board had been pressuring her for years to name a successor, that she had interviewed dozens of qualified executives and trusted not one of them, and that she wanted to bring him into the company, starting slowly, starting honestly, to see if the character she had witnessed in that park was who he truly was day after day, when the stakes grew higher than a torn sandwich. Emma, for her part, spent most of that dinner far less concerned with corporate succession plans than with the question of whether Biscuit could come live with them, a question she asked at least 4 separate times before dessert arrived. Katherine, who had brought the dog along in the back seat of her sedan on something of a hopeful hunch, finally relented with a smile Jack had not yet seen on her in their short acquaintance, one that softened every hard-earned line in her face, and admitted that she thought Biscuit would probably be far happier with a 6-year-old who clearly loved him already than in an empty estate with only household staff for company. It was a small decision in the grand scheme of everything that followed, but it was, in its own quiet way, the moment Jack finally let himself believe that whatever was happening to his family was real, and not some elaborate misunderstanding that would evaporate the moment he woke up. Jack said yes to the position she offered him first, an entry-level operations role in the company's community outreach division, at a salary that alone would have changed his and Emma's life. He did not know, and Katherine did not tell him, that this was itself a test, the first of several she had quietly designed over the following months, watching not through hidden cameras or spies, but simply through the ordinary channel of paying close attention, the way she wished someone had paid attention to her own choices when she was young and broke and just as unseen. The months that followed were not easy ones, despite the sudden change in fortune. Jack struggled in ways that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with unfamiliarity, sitting through his first executive meeting in a borrowed tie, unsure which fork to use at a company dinner, painfully aware of the whispers among certain junior staff who assumed, not entirely unreasonably, that he had been handed his position through some scandal or favor rather than earned it. He almost quit twice. The first time, after a cutting remark from a board member's assistant about his lack of a college degree, he came home and told Emma, honestly, that maybe they did not belong in that world after all, that maybe it was easier to go back to the warehouse, where at least he understood the rules. Emma, drawing at the kitchen table with Biscuit curled at her feet, because Katherine had insisted the dog belonged with them now more than anywhere else, looked up and told her father that Katherine had said kindness was the hardest and most important job in the world, and that her daddy already had years of practice being the best at that job, so surely he could learn the easy stuff too. He kept the job, but the doubt did not fully leave him for weeks afterward. He started arriving an hour before anyone else on his floor, teaching himself from library books how to read a balance sheet, practicing his handshake and his posture in the bathroom mirror above the laundromat, sink the way a much younger man might practice for a first date, terrified of embarrassing Katherine as much as he was terrified of embarrassing himself. What he did not realize, because he was far too busy trying to become someone worthy of the chair he had been given, was that the people around him were slowly, quietly beginning to notice something else entirely. Not a man pretending to belong in a boardroom, but a man who treated the janitorial staff with the same respect he showed the board members, who remembered the names of every assistant's children, who once spent his own lunch break helping a nervous new employee carry boxes up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken and no one else had thought to ask if she needed help. Whatever Jack Turner lacked in polish, he was steadily, unmistakably earning in something far harder to fake. The second time Jack nearly quit was harder. 6 months in, when a mid-level executive named Roger Bellamy, resentful of being passed over for the very position Jack now occupied, orchestrated a minor financial discrepancy in one of the community outreach budgets and quietly leaked to 2 board members that the new hire could not be trusted, timing the accusation for the week of Katherine's annual board review, when her authority to keep making unconventional decisions would be most vulnerable to challenge. Jack found out about the accusation the same way he found out about most things in that building, from a sympathetic assistant who thought he deserved a warning, and he spent an entire sleepless night convinced his brief, improbable second chance was about to collapse exactly the way everyone had quietly assumed it eventually would. He walked into Katherine's office the next morning, not to plead his case, but to resign before she had to fire him, wanting at least to leave with the small dignity of walking out on his own terms. Katherine listened to his resignation in complete silence, her expression unreadable in the way that had unsettled 100 boardrooms before his, and when he finished speaking, she simply asked him one question. "Did you take the money, Jack?" He said no, immediately, without hesitation, the same way he had torn that sandwich in half without hesitation 5 months earlier. Katherine nodded slowly, stood, and told him she already knew that, because she had already ordered a full independent audit the moment the rumor reached her. The same way she quietly audited every serious accusation made in that building regardless of who it targeted, and the audit had already cleared him completely and traced the discrepancy directly to Roger Bellamy's own department. "I don't fire people for being accused, Jack," she told him. "I fire people for lying. And in 5 months, I have never once caught you doing that." Roger Bellamy was gone from the company within the week, and word spread through every floor of that building faster than any official memo ever could, that the quiet man from the warehouse could not be moved by a lie. And neither, apparently, could the woman who had hired him. The story might have ended there, a good and honest tale of a hard-working man finally given his due, but Katherine Vance was not finished, and the crazy, wonderful truth of what she had actually been planning did not come out until nearly a full year after that afternoon in the park. On the anniversary of the day they met, she asked Jack and Emma to join her for dinner again, at the very same modest family restaurant where she had first told him who she was, and this time she brought with her a single folder which she slid across the table without ceremony. Inside was not a raise and not another promotion. It was a complete restructuring of Vance Global's ownership trust, drafted quietly over the past several months by her personal attorneys, naming Jack Turner as her sole legal heir, effective immediately, with full transfer of controlling shares to occur upon her passing, and full operational authority as incoming chief executive officer to begin the following month. Once the board, whom she had already personally briefed and who had unanimously agreed, after watching his first year of work speak louder than any resume ever could, formally ratified the decision. Jack sat frozen at that table, the folder open in front of him, Emma's small hand gripping his sleeve because she could tell from his face that something enormous was happening, even if she did not yet understand what. "I don't understand," he finally managed. "I'm not your family. I'm nobody. 6 months ago, I was loading trucks and hiding sandwiches from my own daughter so she'd have enough to eat." Katherine reached across the table and took his hand, the same way she had knelt in the park a year earlier, cradling the neck of a dog no one else had bothered to feed. "You are not nobody, Jack Turner," she said. "You are the only person I have met in 8 years, who I trust completely with everything I spent my life building, and you earned that trust the exact same way you earned biscuits, by being decent when you thought absolutely nothing was at stake. That is rarer than any fortune I could ever hand you. The fortune is simply catching up to the man you already were. So if you have ever wondered, on a hard night when the refrigerator is empty and the bills are piled too high, whether kindness still counts for anything in a world that so often seems to reward the loudest and the most ruthless, let Jack Turner's story be your answer. He did not become the most powerful man in that city because he was clever or connected or lucky in any ordinary sense. He became that man because on one ordinary Tuesday, with nothing left to give and every reasonable excuse in the world to keep his own half of a torn sandwich for himself, he gave it away anyway, to a starving stray dog who could offer him absolutely nothing in return except, as it turned out, everything. Today, Jack Turner sits on the 40th floor of Vance Global Enterprises, in an office with his daughter's crayon drawings still taped proudly beside the window, with an old golden-brown dog named Biscuit curled asleep under his desk exactly where he has slept every single day since, and with Katherine Vance, now more family to him than the family he lost, seated on the company's board as chairwoman emerita, still showing up most Tuesdays just to see how he is doing. Emma Turner will never again go to bed, wondering if there will be breakfast in the morning. And somewhere in that same city park, on a bench that Jack still visits every single Tuesday afternoon without fail, there is a small brass plaque he had installed himself, which simply reads, "Give what you can, even when you think you have nothing left to give. You never know who is watching, and you never know what it might give back to you." If this story reminded you that kindness is never wasted, even when no one seems to want to be watching, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe, because a brand new story is waiting for you, same time, next week.